Welcome to the fourth in our Prediction 2018 series, Trends and Challenges. Today we're going to focus on human resources, specifically the gender pay gap and the outlook for 2018. Joining me today is our guest, Bryony Badcock, the Director of Global Talent Programs for Pearson. Pearson is one of the world's largest and most successful education organizations. So I think we should probably start with the big question, which is, in what ways do you think that the role of HR is going to change or adjust in 2018?
Well, thanks, Judy. I think that's a really important question. And in my perspective, I think there are four big things that we are going to be looking at for HR, for our challenges for next year. I think one of them is the way that HR really needs to become more strategic and business partner with the organization, to understand a little bit more about the business challenges and to really be able to influence those priorities from that standpoint. There's definitely the emergence of the gig economy, and so really understanding what is the definition of an employee. I think that's been thrown up into question quite a bit just recently. The other thing is, of course, the big thing that people keep talking about, which is technology. So thinking about how technology is changing our organization, how that enables flexible working, and how that really then means that we've got to change as an organization and change as a profession to encompass those digital skills and look at how we recruit and how we manage and retain people through digitization as well.
Wow, that is a lot going on. I hope you guys are up for the challenge.
I think we definitely are. I think there are a number of different HR professionals out there who are really keen to embrace the new ways of working. Well, I think in terms of that, AI, of course, and technology is one of the biggest things that is going to impact jobs, and I think we'll see it come through with demographic changes and income inequality. So people these days need to work side by side technology. You need to be up to speed with the way that technology works, how you integrate that into your day-to-day working life. And if you're not up to speed, I think we'll see that that's where that split will start to happen. There are things like emerging green technologies as well, where there's a lot of investment going into that, but really trying to understand how to cope with that, how to deal with that, again, leads to those separations of that widening gap between what people can and cannot do. Well, I think a lot of it is around changing skills and enhancing the skills of the workforce. Now, we don't necessarily know exactly what the skills are going to be needed for the future, but there is a lot of research that shows it'll be things like creative thinking, deductive reasoning, critical thinking, being able to be creative. And all of that comes through having a growth mindset. So really trying things out, that adaptive learning, constant learning, always looking for a new idea or a new way of doing things. So that level of being curious, I think, as well, is something that's going to really come out. So what that means that we then need to do to help employees as well as employers to embrace that those new skills that I believe are going to be needed in the future is through micro-learning. The rapid change of what we do means that you can't go pull yourself out of the workforce for 4 years to do a degree in something and come back into the workforce. So we're looking at much more targeted learning, much more bite-sized learning. If you look at the rise of massive online open universities, that's enabled people to get the learning that they need when they need it. And in fact, research shows that learning sticks when you learn it as you need it. So again, if you go back to doing a 4-year degree, there might have been modules in there that would be useful, but not at a specific time in your life. So being able to tap into what you need when you need is the important thing. I think it's going to have a huge impact not only on human resources but across the entire organization. So GDPR is the European Union's General Data Protection regulation. It has been in place for a number of years, but what's changing is the severity and the impact of it. So not only will companies need to comply within the EU, but all of their vendors that they liaise with will need to comply with as well. So that means if you are working outside, if you have vendors outside of the EU, jurisdiction, those vendors will still need to comply to that regulation. And the other big thing that's happened with this is the level of fines that are going to be imposed if you do not meet the regulation. So that's a real step change away from what it was before. What we're seeing with it is there's a much deeper classification of what data protection is. No longer can we just rely on it being consensual. So if you tick the box that people can have that information, you cannot just take that as given. You need to have a couple of other layers in place to protect the individual giving the data. You can only keep what's actually really necessary, and it's important. So if I'm asking to send a newsletter to you, do I need your name, surname, as well as address? Well, probably not. I just need your email address. So really understanding what data we're asking for, why we're asking for it, how long are we going to keep it, and what we're going to do with it are some of the questions that are being raised. And so for HR, I mean, of course, that's all around employee data and how we're using that data, and of course for the rest of the business, for all of our clients, for all of the people who we work with, and looking after their data as well. So what we're seeing is that there's a much bigger focus on data protection. Okay. So we have to be a lot more careful about what data we keep, why we keep it, what we do and use it for. On the other hand, we know as an organization, if you are more transparent and you're more able to show your progress and show the impact of the work that you've done, you're much more likely to be held credible and can show that you're being held to account to deliver on what you've been asked to. In the HR space, if you take that on employee data and you want to be able to demonstrate that you are breaking down barriers to things like inequality or gender diversity or anything like that, you need to be really careful about what data we're asking for from employees, and to keep from employees, to be able to then highlight where some of those barriers are. So I think we actually need to rewrite the playbook. I think for a long time there's been a recognition that diversity brings better innovation to an organisation, but it's been a statement rather than an actionable plan. So I think you've got to think about things about looking at the research that you conduct in your organisation, thinking about the data that you hold and collect, analyze that and actually make data-driven decisions on where there might be barriers to progression or barriers that are holding certain groups back from progressing in the organisation. I think it's a bit about ensuring that there is accountability and you are actually publishing against that accountability. So this is if you can publish that your workforce is, we'll take the gender pay gap for example, that there might be a gender pay gap in your organisation. It's about publishing that. It's about talking then about the actions that you're going to take to close that, and then about talking about the results and the progress you're making against closing that gap.
Yeah, we change what we report.
Exactly,
yeah, so
exactly.
We can't change it if we don't see it.
No, exactly. And then I think the other piece is really around thinking through our talent processes. So this is where we look at how we recruit, how we manage, how we promote people, how we assess talent in the organisation, and design our processes in a way that it removes bias. So instead of just going as far as saying, well, we'll take the name off of a CV, for example, let's do away with CVs and let's really ask candidates key competency questions in a way that we're not asking them about what school they went to or where they might live, because that will bring all kinds of unconscious bias towards socio-economic pieces. And instead use statistical smoothing, use statistical modelling to actually remove the bias from the way that we make decisions.
So really focusing on the skills that they have, rather than all of the other dimensions that come into play on a CV.
Absolutely, the skills, talking about the competencies, talking about the behaviours. There are those elements that you can really drill down into, which would be tailored to each type of role, and get people to talk about that, where you can then really see the evidence as to whether or not they're able to do the role that you're recruiting for. And we do the same thing for the way that we might assess talent. So are we making gender biased decisions if we think about gender? Are managers assessing talent more harshly depending on whether they are a certain minority group.
Or age,
or age, and do they know that they're doing that? And sometimes that's not, and sometimes they don't. But through thinking about how we tackle this, you can do things like analysing the way that decisions are made to see if there's a gender bias in it. So if we're doing performance ratings, and a lot of organisations do performance ratings for assessing talent, are we rating one group more than the other group? What does that data look like?
So given all of that, what about the people in the organization? How are they going to embrace all of that? Are they going to embrace all of that?
Well, I think you need to make accountability all the way through the organisation and persuade people that this is not just a leadership piece or not just a minority group piece, but actually the entire organisation needs to be invested in diversity. Statistics show that diversity brings better innovation, better product creation. So there really is that strong case for having a diverse workforce, and so we need to be seeing that accountability for championing diversity throughout the organisation. I think also it's around having really strong leadership. So really setting that example at the top level so that they champion diversity, they champion different ways of working. And then the other thing leading in from that different ways of working is the flexibility. And this is where technology can be really useful. Through technology, we're able to work more fluidly, we're able to work more flexibly, we're able to collaborate, even if we're not in the same time zone or the same country or even the same location. And so if we can design a culture around flexible working, not just specifically say for women or for men, I think it needs to be for the organisation as a whole. We're able to have people do their work that they need to in a way that they can, to do the best work that they can, be most productive when they're most productive. Well, I think this is a really exciting time for HR. I think our roles are on the precipice of being richer, bigger, there's a much broader scope. I think it's really exciting, and I think it's a really crucial time for HR. I think if you look at how we can become more strategic and really business partner and understand the organisation, I think we can become more flexible and creative, where you think an organisation needs to be more responsive, needs to adapt to the needs of globalisation. I think there's the piece around automation and understanding how we can best recruit and support and manage people in the organisation so that they can be their best. And lastly, it's really around delivering value. And to my mind, HR does and has always delivered value, but it's traditionally been seen as a cost centre. And actually, the way that we're changing things is really understanding about having the right people in the right roles, being able to manage them well, being able to pay them appropriately, and really being able to create an environment and a working culture that leads the organisation to success.
So it just sounds like while there's a lot of challenges, the opportunities are substantial.
Absolutely. I think there's so many different directions you can take your career.
Brilliant. Well, Bryony, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and for helping us look at the trends and opportunities and challenges facing human resources in 2018. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me.